it feels really high stakes, especially if you've hired an agency, if you've sunken tens of thousands of dollars into agency support, or you've got a lot of, venture capital riding on your startup or whatever. It can be really easy to sort of get in the weeds of like, if we don't get this message
Mm,
perfect the first time out the gate and it doesn't capture the ROI that we want, then there's just
mhm.
this ton of pressure. But even if you get the message right the first time, you're still going to have to keep investing in the marketing. So regardless of whether you pivot it, you put a new message out there, either way, you're going to invest in your marketing.
Welcome to Brand on the Rocks, the podcast that distills bold ideas into clear messages you can actually use. Each week, we serve up conversations, audits, and straight pours of insight to help you cut through the noise and grow your business. Hosted by brand strategist Ryan Holck, this is where clarity comes neat and your brand gets remembered. Well, hello, Haley. Thank you for being on the Brand on the Rocks podcast today. I know we've known each other I was trying to figure it out. I think it's been at least 2 or 3 years. And for those people who maybe don't know you, aren't familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Haley Walden. I am based in Alabama, USA. I'm a professional writer and editor for 18 years, and I've been in marketing for 11. And I work across multiple areas of content in both strategy and execution. I'm also a nonfiction editor, a book coach, and a fiction author. So I'm in the weeds on all the wordsmith things.
In the weeds on all the wordsmith things. Yes, I feel that at a deep level. I do. Having been just a little in the weeds, not nearly like you, but I so appreciate your work and some of the work we've done together. And I'm always interested. I know that you've written for some big brands. You just mentioned you also are doing, more individual and founder kind of industry expert kind of stuff. When you first approach a project, how do you think about those opening conversations you have with people so do we align and am I the right fit?
Yeah. One of the first things that I try to gauge is how much brand development have you done before we connected? That was particularly important when I was copywriting as my primary service. As I've moved into strategy, I can come in and help a little earlier in the process than I used to be able to. But as a copywriter, if someone came to me and it was clear that they had not really established their brand yet, I would sort of guide them to, take a few steps back. It's not time for a copywriter yet, unless that writer is also, a brand builder. So that's, I like to look at how developed the brand is, where they're at with their current messaging, whether they need, you know, early stage strategy and development, or whether they're repositioning and need an overhaul of their messaging. And so, yeah, I work at many different stages of that process. So really I like to narrow it more to like, what don't I jump into? And generally I'm hesitant
Mm.
to jump in if there's not a good bit of groundwork that's been done.
Are there any then key things that you feel like are the red flag or the green flag for you to move forward in one of those projects? Like when you say groundwork, I have an idea what that means, but what's that mean on your radar?
Yeah. Um, Need to know what the purpose behind their business is, who's their target audience, have they established any baseline messaging, even if that needs to be refined and packaged properly. Do they really understand where they fit in the market? Have they done their market research? Do they know who their competitors are? Have they sort of done that legwork to try to build who they are, what they're about, core values, and yeah, just like the markets they serve and where they want to sit? It's very difficult to create messaging for a brand or a business owner who's not really clear on those things going in, even if they need help developing that clarity, there's got to be a delineated starting point, not just a vague, like, I want to do something, but I'm not sure where to start. I tend to need to come into the process a little bit later.
I like to say that if you don't have some foundation started, we're going to have a hard time building the walls. That there's got to be something there in the process, or at least in the works. And that's one of the challenges that I found with like people who are in truly the first, like, say 6 months of something, is that when they're still trying to figure it out, it's really hard to help them gain traction because there's so many unknowns still. So do you have a process when you walk in then and kind of start that engagement with them? They've got something there. Like what does that look like just from a tactical standpoint to walk in and help somebody kind of figure those pieces out?
Yeah. So normally I start with some kind of onboarding call where we get a dump of information to find out where they're at, what they need, what they think the problem is, because sometimes they're not correct about that. So, like, all of us, like, I'll step back enough to say, we're all too close to our own businesses. So we think, oh, well, I need this, that, and the other. But actually, there might be something else. So I like to try to look at it from, what do you think you need? Let's talk about what you might actually need. And then really, it's some form of brain dump, and then it's some form of me getting completely fire hosed with their brand information. So, like, they'll send me, video content or, current written content. Lately, the most the most common thing is for me to get their brand book and whatever guidelines they have for that, and then some examples of content that performed well, or if the brand is established. And yeah, it's usually just a huge information download, and then it's me parsing this information. And from there, I'll usually, if they need brand guidance, I'll look across the board as, does your brand guideline match with your website, match with your social? You know, where are the gaps, and who are each of these platforms and presences online speaking to, so that
Mm.
I can give them some guidance about how the messaging might need to be tweaked, because often, maybe who they think they're talking to isn't always who's actually getting the message.
Yes and yes. Yeah, who the audience they think they're talking to isn't always the audience. So true. In those moments, so I end up walking strategically into some similar situations, not thinking necessarily about the copy as much as the overarching messaging piece. And I find that sometimes the business owner has an idea, or the team has started to develop an idea, and there's almost this hodgepodge, like we built a little bit, we built a little bit, we built a little bit, but there's not consistent messaging of any kind. And there's this, help us fix it. And I kind of look at it and go, fix what part? Like, which part is right? Does that resonate with you at all?
It does. And I'll take that a step further, because it often gets created either by committee or by a team that's like on a shoestring. So they get something
Mm-hmm.
out there to have it out there. So I've seen both. I've seen, like, a committee put this together, and it doesn't, it speaks to what we think it is, but maybe not to the target audience clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it's just something that was thrown onto the internet to, like, placeholder, right? It's a placeholder, and there's an intention to build it out later. But what I've seen often is, when you figure out what part to fix first, oftentimes it reminds me of coding, right? Like, you get into the code and you're like, oh, I found a problem, and you fix it and it breaks like 10 other things. And I've experienced that in different client settings, particularly where there's a larger team. So you think that you're going to clean up this message over here, and then the committee reviews it, and then it blows up. You're like, wait a minute, what did you hire me for again?
Wow. So part of that tension, at least that in my space, has always been, how am I going to connect these dots? And it may be, as you mentioned, breaking pieces as we go to kind of, but then keeping in mind, I know you're missing some things, which is why you're not getting to the goal. So having to create essentially not just that brand voice, but continue the voice, even if it's a little disconnected. How do you think about writing for the client with the customer in mind? From a, and this is what I mean, is like, just to keep the voice consistent, to get, you know, I found it difficult to write like the client and always still hit the goals, because as I wrote like the client, it continued to not deliver right. So have you figured out, like, what's your trick? Because I've seen you do it really well. And so, like, what is your process there, or is it just gut?
A lot of it's good. It's looking at what's on the page already and asking, does this answer questions that the typical customer would ask? And some clients have questions laid out that they get on a regular basis. Objections is a big thing. Like, if you have some kind of reference point to what the usual objection is, you can reverse engineer that into the messaging and go, okay, well, this doesn't answer any of those questions. More often than not, though, I see when the language isn't speaking directly to the customer, what happens a lot of times is that the leadership is using insider language that doesn't necessarily translate. I had one experience, it's been several years ago, but I had overhauled a website for a client and had really simplified the language, and it was really, really clean. And some of the things that I took out were, it was insider phraseology that no average person is going to like walk in, read this and know what it means. If you're if you're at the level of the people who created that language and you're talking to each other, it makes sense. But it's not
Mm.
likely to make sense to a customer incoming that wants to engage services. So I managed to scrub a lot of that insider language, but then when it went through review, the committee put it back. And not only did it get put back, the homepage was astronomically longer than what it was. And when I say long, I mean like very long, like a piece of long form content long. And so it was it was disheartening to go in and try to sharpen things and clarify that, and then to have that come back. And what it really boils down to is almost like it's not always fear, like fear's not always the right word, but I think sometimes it fits. But it's like, well, if we don't put everything here, and if I don't say everything I think I should say, then potential client is not going to understand. And that's not always true. They want to know what they're going to get out of it and what the offer entails. It's, the whole features and benefits, right? What it is, who it's for,
Mhm.
what it can do for you, what you're going to get out of it. And if you've got extraneous details that you really want to make sure they get, put them on the website, but they don't all have to be like on your homepage, right? But so often that comes back to this insider speak that, maybe leaders in the same industry speak the same language, but that's not always gonna travel down because
Mm.
the user wants to know, how does this benefit me? What do I get out of it? and they don't necessarily care about jargon or, unless it's like a B2B kind of thing, where the where industry language has to be used in order to communicate. But it's just it's an interesting concept because a lot of times the C-suite maybe cares about hearing or saying certain things that the customer doesn't care about so much.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I think part of that is a perspective that's essentially ego driven, but like if we don't say it fully or say it the way we've always said it, it's not going to continue to work. I have struggled to help clients understand sometimes that extraneous information, that may be important but is not first contact kind of information. I've struggled to get them to come to grips with that and be able to separate the process, and go, maybe I say that 3 pages in, not on the first contact. Do you have any words of wisdom on what that conversation might entail to like wrestle through that with a client? Because I mean, truth be told, I've fought it again and again, and I've got one right now that could go that way. Just like when you go into that conversation, what are you, other than the defeat that comes from the creative side of you, like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. I think because the way that I described in my last answer, it sounded very much one-sided. So I'm gonna add the other side to this, that it's important for the creative or the strategist going in to listen to what the C-suite has to say, or the
Mm,
leader or the owner or whatever. Listen to the stakeholders, try to understand where they're coming from, what why they feel that this needs to be said, why they've been saying it, like, try to get to the emotional roots under that because it's not necessarily about, you know, the service provider steamrolling and dictating everything, right? At the end of the day, I didn't win. There's not, like, really a win or lose here. I didn't get, you know, what I was going for with that one client, and, later, there was another overhaul, and later, things were done differently, right? But in that moment, I made the recommendation, and they didn't follow it, and sometimes that happens, right? But I think if you go in as a service provider with enough empathy to say, "Tell me where you're coming from, help me understand," you know, sometimes you can walk them through a process where you can help them detach enough from whatever. It's kinda like being precious about something. You might be able to help them detach enough from it that they can then put it where it needs to go. You wanna do your best to try to help them reframe where it could go. This doesn't have to go away, but it's more appropriate right here. And sometimes the client will say, great, let's go for it. And other times you may not get that synergy that you're going for. But I would say, you know, you've got to care enough about why they care about it. Because if it's really important to change it, if they know you actually care about where they're coming from, I think that you have more opportunities
mm.
for cooperation and moving forward.
I think that's such a great filter for leaders as well when they're looking for team members. The default is so often, I just need someone who can do the task, not someone who can think strategically and empathetically about our brand and how all the pieces come together. Mm. Because that so often is the messy kind of middle of a creative process, and getting to the heart of what may work and what may not work. One of the things you mentioned even before we hit record was that the beauty of really the move to digital and not just old school media for advertising and marketing is that there's this option to iterate, and this option that it doesn't have to be right the first time. There's a process now to really learn and get better. I thought that was fascinating. Tell me how that kind of plays out for you in the work you're doing.
So generally with digital, it's so easy to pivot your messaging if something is not working. But I've found that, you know, clients of all sizes have this almost baseline of, again, it's not always fear, but there's a lot of uncertainty around, we've got to get this messaging right the first time. And I had a conversation with a client of mine who was launching a new business about 2 years ago, where I told him, this is your shingle, essentially, like you're hanging your shingle online and we can edit that, right? It feels really high stakes, especially, if you've hired an agency, if you've sunken tens of thousands of dollars into agency support, or you've got a lot of, venture capital riding on your startup or whatever, it can be really easy to sort of get in the weeds of like, if we don't get this message
Mm.
perfect the first time out the gate and it doesn't capture the ROI that we want, then there's just
Mhm.
this ton of pressure. But with online spaces, it's so easy. Yeah, it's a little time consuming and it costs money, but marketing costs money in general. And even if you get the message right the first time, you're still going to have to keep investing in the marketing for that message. So regardless of whether you pivot it, you put a new message out there, either way, you're going to invest in your marketing. And so for me, I like to think about messaging in that way as call and response. So you strategically create the call to your target audience. You put it out there and then you see how they respond. And if they don't respond the way that you wanted them to or needed them to, then you're going to tweak that, whether it's putting the same message in other places or putting a different message out there. That's the point of A/B testing. It's the point of the data behind the messaging. If you go in and look and see that something's not working, then it's time to change that and preferably sooner rather than later. So that's generally how I look at it is we put way too much pressure, and I say this from a personal standpoint too as somebody who has my own personal brand and a couple of businesses that serve different demographics. And it's like, oh, if this reel doesn't work, then what am I doing? Why am I putting my time into this? But it's just the reality of the game. There's time investment, even if dollars aren't behind it. There are dollars investment if you're playing a bigger game, and I think that you just have to be open to the possibility of shifting and iterating and letting it be a discovery process rather than, oh, well, we discovered everything already in strategy the first time, as if there's nothing new to discover. Because we all know and we've all seen businesses that come out the gate strong and then a few years in, they're dwindling and they haven't changed what they're doing. So what happened? Right? There's
Mm.
just no
Yeah.
set it and forget it in marketing.
I love so much about that. First of all, marketing costs time and money. And I think so many businesses try and shortchange it. They think somehow marketing isn't going to cost. I, as you were talking, I kept flashing back to Super Bowl ads because, in my opinion, this was some of the worst class of Super Bowl ads we've had in a number of years. I even posted about it a few times recently. But I look at brands that are willing to spend $8 to $10 million just to show up at the big game and then commit to NBC or whoever the affiliate is that they're going to at least spend that amount in addition to that single run. And I look at what was put out and I think, did you not talk to your customers? Did you forget who your customer is? Like, and these are like people who are obviously spending millions of dollars, and it's an encouragement to me, who tends to serve people whose marketing budget is under 100,000 a year, or to go, the big guys are iterating and missing. I mean, some of them are hitting strong, but some of them are iterating and missing. Like, how much more is there the ability for us to test and try, test and try, test and, and tweak, and take that kind of approach to our marketing. Is we're going to get it as far as we can get it. And we're going to see how it works. You mentioned the whole, if this reel doesn't work, I feel, when I have a reel that doesn't work, like I feel it, like I'm like, wow, I failed, rather than probably 80% of that worked, but something didn't. So what didn't? And going back to the strategy side of me, going, so what was it that caused it to miss? And I think that's where a messaging strategist person who's a writer like yourself can really speak into some of those moments. Uh, you have you have something on your website. You talk about your you-ness, your unique you-ness. You say it several times, and I kept reading it going, I think I know exactly what she's saying, but how does that play into you helping people tell their story well?
Yeah, that comes in often when I'm working with solopreneurs one on one. Sometimes it also plays a hand in a brand too, not just personal brand, but a developed brand. And what that is really is the personal essence that you bring to the table. It's like your energy. So you can feel the difference in the energy between like Nike and Brooks, right? Nike's like this pump it up, it's all about like the encouragement and everything. It's not that Brooks doesn't do that, but exactly like Brooks it's a running shoe and this is for a subset of runners who are passionate about this brand. And then Nike has like a really broad appeal across age demographics. But there's a difference in the energy in between those, even though they serve similar market and arguably, almost the same types of customers with just varying interests. But you can feel the difference when you encounter the brand. At it's like sitting at a round table with, like, 6 different people and discussing, everybody's take on a certain topic, and everybody's got a different angle. So your Eunice is like your angle, it's how you show up, it's how it feels to encounter you, and I like to try to infuse brands with that because so to go back to the idea of being too close to your own business, it's so easy when you do that market research and you go and you look at your competitors or you look at similar businesses that you want to sort of position yourself similar to, right? It is so easy to be like, well, they're doing it this way and they're saying it this way and that works. So I'm going to do it like that. And I can speak to that from experience as somebody who, when I started my business, it was very much how's that other copywriter doing it? Well, I can do that, like, you
Mm,
know, and not from a standpoint of trying to copy somebody else, but not being true to myself or the way I need it to work. Looking at like, oh, well, this business model works really well for this writer's making like multiple six figures. That seems like something I could do, right? So then you run
mm,
after that, and a little while later, you hit a brick wall, and you're like, "Oh, I didn't approach the business from some, an alignment to myself." So that Eunice goes back to, even talking about how I do business, being mindful of how I need to show up and not trying to make myself like look a certain way that doesn't feel true to me.
mhm.
That's and again, that's not a criticism so much as it is just what humans do when they don't have outside objective guidance because we just see like, "Oh, what are they doing?" Well, I mean, that makes sense to me, so I'm gonna try it that way. So, it's really extracting that takes oftentimes even if it's just a friend who knows you really well, like, it doesn't even have to be a professional, like, brand person, whatever, it could be a friend who will tell you the truth and knows you in and out. But you need somebody who's committed to understanding who you are and how you wanna show up and how you actually do show up, and then they can help you translate that into your brand message, and that's something that I've done instinctively over the years. I used to brand myself, and I still talk like this, but intuitive copywriter
Mhm.
was my first like tagline because I could sit down with somebody and pull that out of them where maybe they sat in front of the blank page and tried to write about their own business or tried to encapsulate that. And instead of being able to really, translate that message from their heart onto the page, what they're thinking is, I got to get it right. I got to get it right. I got to get it right. But you bring in a third party who understands,
Mm.
branding and extracting like what your magic is, then that takes the pressure off of you to like, oh, somebody else gets me and they can help me talk about myself. And then once you're dialed into how to talk about yourself, it's a whole lot easier to align with the Eunice. It's like, let's say the chiropractor comes in and like adjusts the atlas at the top of my spine and everything goes, not that that's always how that works, but it's just a fun visual. But yeah, that's really what it is. It's that extraction of the magic. It's like an empathic connection with that person or that brand and really getting where they're coming from and then being able to use messaging to communicate that in a way that somebody else, like a third party who encounters it is like, "Gotcha. I get it."
That is so good because I also find because I listen to people's story and I go, here's the most important parts, the rest is extraneous. Like it's important, but it's not the most important. And it's almost intuitive. Like it's hard sometimes to explain it. Like how did you just do that? I have no idea. I can't replicate it. I just know it happens. But it's interesting to hear you say that because and explain it that there's an intuitive nature, but also some strategic piece to it. Because I find when someone it's so hard when you're inside the bottle to look out and read the label that we look at our businesses, especially solopreneurs, small businesses who, 5 people or less, where you're kind of all doing, you're sharing job responsibilities. Like there's leadership, but you're still just trying to get the jobs done a lot of the time. That there is such this, I can't explain it in a way that the others outside need it. That is so important sometimes to find somebody like you who can help find somebody like me on the story side to even just go take a step back and let me just listen to you and tell you what I hear as an outsider. The third party, in my opinion, that is the biggest benefit that can be brought by an outside person. The work is great, but it's that outside perspective to go, let me help you focus this as someone who has never heard this before. I'm not living it 50 hours a week. I'm not in it every day. Like, you want your customer to understand it in 30 seconds? Tell it to me in half an hour and let me tell you what's most important. Uh, and that's the part that I see so many businesses, you said earlier, marketing costs. It does, but that's the part that so many businesses don't want to pay for is that strategic work of really going, someone from the outside speak into this right now. I end up helping clients and then releasing them with tools to keep building it for themselves because they did that amount of work and they figured it out. And sometimes they've got a person on the team who can run with it. Other times, we come back 6 months later and I start help picking up the pieces. But it's that back and forth that happens at that table, you know. Sometimes, as you said, there's 6 of you around the table and you're all throwing all the ideas out. Something magical does happen when you do that. And when the conversation is guided by someone outside the circle,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and if as a leader, if you are receptive to that outside
Yeah.
feedback and you can let go enough to consider a different perspective and a different spin, you might find something that really resonates with your audience, especially if you're in this season of like, what we've been doing isn't working, or we did this thing and it fell flat, you know, and it's a lot of responsibility. It's high stakes, but maybe it's not as high stakes as we think it is. And I think, to your point, if we are
Mm.
resistant to the idea of investing in marketing, it's going to feel like higher stakes and it's going to feel worse because we're trying to like I said, set it and forget it. Like, let's one shot this and do it right. And then we can put it on autopilot. But these
Uh-huh.
days, it just doesn't work that way, especially, audience needs change. Who's paying attention changes depending on the product or the service. The people that follow you for a season might move on because they're in a different stage of life. Maybe they don't need you like they did. So then you've got to find new people who
Mhm.
need that. Right. And I think some brands are maybe, maybe more equipped to understand that that could be coming. Like if you've got a baby product, well, you're not going to have the same customers in perpetuity for the most part. Like you're going to have to refresh your marketing. You're going to have to keep out. Um, so really I think that if, if we could reframe how we think about it, that this is ongoing, marketing doesn't stop. So let's put a sustainable process in place and let's remove the resistance to it, because when you remove that resistance, you might be able to iterate with the clearer thought process than if, "Oh, man, this didn't work and now I have to do it again." And like, yeah, we all have to do it again. And
Yeah.
every 5 minutes the algorithm changes. So, like, whatever you did that got you on people's feeds last month may not work anymore. So, what are you
Right.
gonna do? You're gonna lay down and no, I mean, I've laid down a lot. Um, but, you know, my goal for this year is to, like, not face plant when my own marketing doesn't work for me
Mhm.
and reiterate. Because right, like, we market for other people for a living, and then we do it for ourselves, and we're like, "Oh, I know why this hurts." Like,
Right.
I get it. I've been in your shoes.
And I think the piece of that is when we say reiterate, we don't mean scrap it all and start over. Now, there are moments when that may be the case, and you already alluded to that with some of your coming into a business that's got pieces all over that you're trying to, there's times when you just burn it to the ground and move on. But so many times with customers are like, I can't afford to start over. I'm like, I'm not saying start over. I'm saying let's take what worked and build on it. Like it's not we aren't we're this is a step beyond A B testing. I'm saying these sections connected, these we know didn't. Let's take what we learned and move forward, and taking that kind of approach to the whole marketing strategy so that there's this evolution of how you're talking about it. There's enough movement in the visuals that people aren't getting bored with what you're sharing, but that you're getting traction. And if you take a step and go, that didn't work. Well, my whole for years, I would scrap a project and I'd be like, "Shit." I get to the point where I'm like, I always save an old copy and I build off a new fresh build, because without fail, there will be something that worked there that I wasn't sure about. And I'm searching to go back for it. What element was different? Something connected different. The call to action was different. The something on that section was different. I need to figure out why. I think
Yeah.
it's so important.
Sometimes the groundwork is all there and you have all the elements you need, but it's just not arranged in a way that makes sense. Like if it's a website, you might have a visitor. I'm working with a brand right now where I helped to overhaul their website copy, and I was building in new sections as I went down the homepage because there's a lot of this particular brand has a lot of education required for the target prospect. And so to get that education in, well, it can't all go on the homepage because it's too much. But I noticed as I was like auditing the original site that there was a menu, like the top nav menu, but the actual homepage did not have sections and links that led people into that information. And so I started to build that in. All the content existed. It just needed to be updated. They had updated their brand book, and so I I helped them do that and then kind of incorporated all they had all this work from several different directions, and they had had a couple of different audits done and things like that. So we consolidated all the things, kept the stuff that made sense, and then started moving that into the website language. So it's so often you're closer than you think you are to what you're trying to do,
Mhm.
but when you are the insider, so you know all the things, and it can be difficult to flip that and put yourself in, the shoes of a new user who's never met your brand. So when they encounter it for the first time, then you got to roadmap it for them. That's what they tell us,
Mhm.
like baby, baby brand owners. Like this is particularly a conversation I have a lot with authors is like, you've got places you want your reader to go, but you have to tell them where to go because if they want more from you, they don't like, how are they going to know where to find it? You have to tell them. So, like, it's the same thing, for a bigger brand. So the leaders know where everything's at. Um, and maybe you feel like, oh, it's complete. Well, all the information's here. But, there's simple things like, heat mapping your website to figure out like where are people dropping off and what are they not clicking on or where does it seem like they're not. So then you just rearrange that from there. But it's just it's interesting to iterate through that process. And you were talking about projects. So like one of my favorite projects, bar none, is one that we worked on together with Diana Alt. In her
Mhm.
case, her business was working. She has 4 different client demographics that she serves. She had a great website. The groundwork was all there, but what she wanted was to go and clarify a little bit more to help the people who visited her site know exactly where to go. And that was one of the like, you and me and Diana roundtabled that, and we were able to create an updated iteration of that website that's clearer and helps each demographic know where they need to be on the site. They don't have to go looking anymore, right? It's all
Right.
there, but all the groundwork was there for it. There was no real pivot in her business. It was just, let's update how we're talking about this. Let's update where it's positioned on the website
Mhm.
so that there's more clarity. And, it never hurts to revisit your brand and say, okay, can I make this clearer and how?
Right. The thing about that project that I loved was, first of all, I feel like you gave a fresh approach to some of the writing and talking about some of those elements. But on my side, which was more of the, like, let's just wireframe out what the customer experience should be like to get them through those steps to actually take action, was that it was not rocket science. It was just going, if I was a customer and I needed to step through these steps, how would I expect them to be? Now let's make sure the content that Haley wrote matches what the Kajabi website looks like. And so, and the cool part was it was a fun project. It was not a huge lift, but it made a huge impact in her business. Like within a month, she had a dramatic increase in leads because all of a sudden people found where they wanted to go, found what they wanted to do. And so I think you're right that so much of that is iterating because we didn't start from scratch. We didn't, in fact, she mentioned to me she's got some things that she'd probably like to tweak again because it's been long enough now that she's changed some packages and how she's talking to some of those people and going, probably need to change a couple sections. I don't She doesn't need to do the scope of what we did before, but she definitely is at a point where, there's a couple offers that have changed because now she's thinking like the user of the site, the consumer of the web of the content rather than the producer of it. So helping clients get there, that's challenging. Haley, for the solopreneur, the small business owner who is going, okay, iteration, marketing costs, hiring people. I don't know how I get there right now. Is there something you would suggest they could do as a first step or even a resource that you have that would help people start some of this process as they're going, I think I need to head this way. I'm not totally sure how to take the first steps. Like, how could you help them?
Yeah. So on my website, it's HaleyWalden.com. It's just my name.com. I have a free resource. It's a DIY brand voice workbook. And so as I built it out, I thought through the kinds of questions that I ask clients in onboarding to sort of start downloading their brand information and why they do what they do. So some of those questions come through on that in that workbook. And it's just a PDF that you can download and work through. And it should help you to sort of get more in touch with your own voice so that you can start thinking about what your content can look like through that lens.
And if they wanted to get on your calendar for a call, same place or where should they go?
Same place. Yeah. I've got a book a
Awesome.
call link
All
on
right.
my site.
Fantastic. I will put that in the show notes. Haley, thank you for this conversation. I know we had some tech challenges. If you're listening, you'll probably notice there's a couple hard cuts in the middle of this, but I hope the information has been helpful because at least for so many of the owners, business owners, leaders that I'm serving, there is this tension between I want to be excellent and I have to be realistic with what's in my hands right now and what my budget is and how I think about this. And I think Haley's outlined some great ideas for you to think about your marketing and iteration and things like that. So, Haley, I so appreciate it. Thank you for being with me today.